Hey guys, if there is one piece of tech that worries me as a software engineer, that is spec driven development. And here is why. Spec driven development promises that write a complete spec, a detailed spec about what you want your software to look like, and you just hand it over to your agent. And agent will completely figure out how that needs to be developed. And it's not just front end, it is backend, databases, cloud infrastructure. Anyone who can write a spec, who can describe a product, can probably create software. I think that is why I want to learn more about it. I am Prasad. I am an AI and software consultant working in tech industry for around 20 years, also running my own digital technology company. So yeah, let's learn it together. My usual learning style is I keep jotting down all the questions. One by one, we'll just answer those questions. Let's start together. I've just opened a simple Google Doc. What is spec-driven development? And what are all my questions in my mind? So yeah, I think first one is, what is spec-driven development? Is the fastest. Okay, let's start to answer them one by one. So what is spec driven development? Okay, now I'll just go and Google about spec driven development. Okay, and what I get is SDD is a software engineering methodology where a formal machine readable specification or contract acts as the primary source of truth from which code, tests, and documentation are derived. Particularly popularized with AI assisted coding, it ensures AI agents build exactly what is intended by defining behavior first. This video explains the basics. I want to see the video, but maybe a bit later. Right, I think this is a blog I've seen before. It's written by ThoughtWorks, by Liu Shangyi. Is it or Liu Shangqi? Maybe it's Liu Shangqi. Spec-driven development may not have visibility of a term like vibe coding, but it's nevertheless one of the most important practices to emerge in 2025. Right. So this is not too new. This is published in December 2025. So I'm sure there has been chatter about SDD before that. It also highlights how quickly software engineering has evolved in recent months. Yes, so defining spec-driven development and competing interpretations of it. So there can be multiple interpretations of spec-driven development. That itself is interesting, right? What are the competing interpretations of, right? Let me add that. What are some competing interpretations of SDD? I don't know. Context of a spec-driven development's emergence. Okay, there is some history to it. What is a spec? That's very interesting, isn't it? What exactly is a spec? And that's one question we have. What is a spec? Are there any standards? Are there any standards? Right, a specification is definitely more than just a product requirement document. Yeah, I was thinking about that. That is it just a PRD? Can we just take an existing PRD and build a software with that? Would that work? Even simply applying a more structured prompt and more explicitly technical constraints can produce better code than a plain PRD. Right, so it seems like there is an idea there that a spec will be a structured prompt. So the whole of spec will be written in a way which can be easily understood by agents. So I guess so I guess machine learning so I guess a machine readable format like Markdown might just be the best suited format. What makes a good spec? Our experiences from BDD are still valid. The new technology shouldn't change this much. Okay. And then there is more. Okay, I'm not going to just like start reading through the blog. I think what we want to do is answer a few questions. There is a blog on GitHub, Spec Driven Development with AI. Get started with a new open source toolkit. What toolkit is this? Spec Kit. Right, okay. So what is Spec Kit? I'd seen this before, but never dug into it at a high level. Build high quality software faster. Right. This is interesting. What is spec driven development? Get started, video, overview, community extensions, presets. Right. So you can install a specific CLI. So it seems like this is a tool which helps you do a complete spec driven development on your machine. Okay. Create a spec. How do you Right, so this will create a complete boilerplate of a spec. Maybe it will just create the full spec with the right sections in it, and you are just supposed to fill those sections up. So it seems like the idea is create the spec, create a technical implementation plan, break down into tasks, and then execute implementation. So all these things seem like they are some kind of commands. Constitution. What is a constitution? Command to create your project's governing principles and development guidelines that will guide all subsequent development. Create principles focused on code quality, testing standards, user experience consistency, and performance requirements. From that, what I understand is a constitution from a SDD perspective is a complete guidelines of what a good code should look like for you. It could be about your coding guidelines, it could be testing standards, it could be some guidelines about how you want your UX to be. It could be, based on style guidelines, maybe even performance requirements that, maybe, and SLAs. Maybe you have your performance uh, requirement, like I think this spec is used by, I don't know, certain users, business users who want my, you know, m- kind of sub-second response because they are really busy and something like that. I think maybe that's what it can be, right? So it seems there are multiple steps for it, and there are many community extensions like Architect Impact Previewer, AI-driven engineering, AIDE. This is itself an interesting one, right? Maybe I can go into it later and dig more into it. Okay, that's a lot. Right, what else? What else? Ah, there is a blog about it on Martin Fowler's blog. Aha. Right, so there is GitHub. I think we just this is a quote from GitHub. In this world, maintaining software means evolving specifications. The lingua franca of development moves to a higher level, and code is the last mile approach. Right. And Tessel, uh, I think they say a development approach where specs, not code, are the primary artifacts. Okay, this is an important concept, right? When you developed software, then the primary artifact of what you developed was the code itself. And what spec driven development seems to be endorsing is your well written spec will be the primary artifacts. So, what that means is if there is a change, you change the spec, you don't change the code. You change the spec, and the change in the spec itself drives change in the code. That's very similar to how you write your code in Java, and when you compile it, the bytecode gets created. Now, you don't care about what the bytecode looks like. but what you care about is how your Java code is written. I think from an abstraction perspective, it is exactly a similar model where your code now becomes a detail which you shouldn't need to go into. What you care about is a well-written spec. Now, interestingly, language is always open to interpretation, and you might argue that the extreme version of exactly specific instruction is basically a code, right? You cannot interpret a for loop many different ways. You cannot interpret, if then statement, even if it is very close to how we might we might say, colloquially. But language is open to interpretation, and maybe that is going to be one of the challenges of spec-driven development. That one who specifies a spec needs to be so specific about the feature that if you get that statement wrong, and if in case that statement is just open to interpretation, then that's going to be a big problem. I'm pretty sure the code review or the linting or the standards of how you write spec will have to be, I think there will be some kind of a lint checks or scanning of your spec just to understand, just to check if every statement is an ambiguous, that every statement is unambiguous. And I think that's going to be very interesting, isn't it? Kiro. Yes, I've heard so. I think I've heard Amazon Kiro is a product which is, okay. I think I'm just going into an open exploration, isn't it? I'm just simply Googling and talking about it. And maybe as a YouTube video, this structure is may not work at all, which is fine. I'm just experimenting. So what we answered is, what is spec-driven development? I think we have a fair idea about it. Not too detailed. Not detailed enough where I can actually, right now, I can open a tool and start developing a software. Maybe as a follow-up video, what we can do is we can take a very simple software idea, right? There are many popular software tools out there, or maybe we can just come up with one. I think other day I was doing an e-signature on a document, on a legal document, and we were using DocuSign. Maybe we can we can take DocuSign as an example because it's like slim enough. I know there are many functionalities and features, but the minimum functionality of DocuSign is something you can summarize in a nice little spec, and then we can just let AI agents build something that looks like DocuSign. Or maybe if you have any other idea of for a very simple example software that we want to build, just let me know and let me know in the comments. Right. So we looked at what is spec-driven development. Are there any tools that you should know for spec-driven development? Yes, we looked at three tools so far. I think Kiro, we saw something for Tessel.io, the package manager for dot agent skills, but are people really using it for spec-driven development? So is Tessel good for spec-driven development? Okay, Tessel is designed specifically for spec-driven development. What happened? Okay, it's back. It is back. Right. So yes, what is Tessel? Tessel is designed specifically for spec-driven development. So now we know about three tools. What are these three tools? One is SpecKit from GitHub. Other one is Amazon Kiro, and the third one is Tessel. And when we pick our first example on actually trying out spec-driven development, maybe we can try one of these solutions. Okay, what is a spec? Are there any standards? Right. So let's try to answer that with with Kiro. What does Kiro recommend as a spec? Are there any guidelines? What is Kiro? What is spec-driven development? How do I get started with Kiro? Right, enterprise docs. Okay, let's go to the documentation and let's see installation, authentication, your first project. This is interesting. So yeah, what does the process look like? Before starting, ensure you have installed Kiro. Okay, this is something very Kiro specific. Let me ignore all that product information. Editor, I won't go into it. I want to know what is a spec. What are specs? Specs or specifications are structured artifacts that formalize development process for features and bugs, for features and bug fixes in your application. Code structure of this is interesting. Core structure. Every spec. I think I'm getting out of focus again. Okay. So what are specs? And and this one was an interesting bit, right? Especially the core structure. Every spec generates three key files that form the foundation of your specification. First is requirements.md or bugfixmd. Interesting. Captures user stories, acceptance criterias, or bug analysis in structured notation. Okay, so structured notation is an important bit here because it seems if your structure of the notation breaks or maybe your format breaks, then maybe weird things may happen. I don't know. Design documents technical architecture, sequence diagrams, and implementation considerations. Now, as soon as you start talking about design.md, that just means person who is writing the design, right? So the next one is design.md, documents technical architecture, sequencing diagrams, and implementation considerations. Now, as soon as you start talking technical architecture, that means the person who is writing the spec needs to understand the technical intricacies of a software, right? That also means I think person needs to have technical knowledge. So I wonder if design.md or design markdown file might be an optional. So someone who just wants to define a requirement, maybe from someone from maybe from business side, I think they can simply define the requirements. There are two options with design.md. You can probably break down a requirement into an implementation plan, and I think that is where maybe the tool can help us write design.md, right? You know that you can use agents in a way where you plan your requirements, where it comes up with a plan, and then you ask it to implement, right? If you have worked with Claude, there is a saying, plan with Opus, execute with Sonnet. So when you plan with, Okay, I think my tripod is is getting disturbed again and again. Okay. Yes, not sure what's happening here. So yes, there are three files: requirements.md, design.md, and tasks.md. So I think you start with, from what I understood, when we looked at the GitHub spec, it seems there were commands on how you instruct at every level. From requirements, you have to create design. From design, you create implementable tasks. So all those details will also be stored as a spec on in your, should I even call it code base, like spec base? I don't know. But you can see idea for feature foo. It goes in open spec session in chat. It will go into a spec folder and then click spec pane. Okay, this is very tool specific, but I'm trying to have a conceptual understanding of the whole thing. So the so right, so this is a three-phase workflow. All specs follow a three-phase workflow that transforms your idea into an executable plan. So you start with your requirements or bug fixes. I don't know why bug fixes are coming in. Let's separate the two, because in my mind we haven't even generated a software yet. I think let's think about when the software is generated, how do we monitor? Ideally, there shouldn't be any, did I just say that? Even if agent creates a software, there can be bugs, and it may require human feedback to say, hey, this isn't what is the right behavior, and then that might be a bug, right? So you start with the requirement, then go into design, then I think there will be an implementable task, and Kiro provides a task as execution interface for tasks.md. And right, there are types of spec. There is a feature spec, there is bug fix spec, and there are just two types, right? So the feature spec clearly will have a certain uh, kind of format to it, and bug fix spec will have some other format. So I think let's go into them and compare. Feature spec, key benefits: structured approach, flexibility, documentation, tracking, collaboration, workflow variants, requirement first, design first, requirements with EARS notation, the easy approach to requirements syntax, which is like when certain thing happens, then the system shall handle it by doing something, right? So it seems we are now getting to the nitty-gritties of what that spec looks like. And bug fix spec is where surgical fixes, regression prevention, documentation, reliability, how it works, starter spec, bug fix. Okay, that's very interesting. I think I'm starting to get a hang of it. Right. Is there a good way of writing a perfect spec? It seems every tool will probably recommend a way to write a spec. And I think what will happen eventually, there will be an open standard of spec, similar to what happened with skills. If you are following how Anthropic came up with idea of Claude skills, and skills itself became an open standard thanks to Anthropic, and then I think that's where agent skills came in picture. Similarly, I think there are multiple tools who are recommending what a spec should look like. Is there an open standard? Is there an open standard for spec driven development? Google Gemini thinks yes, there are emerging open source standards and toolkits for spec driven development designed for coding agents. When it says standards, that means there's no one standard, right? Of course, with Claude skills, there is no one standard, and everyone comes with their own variations of what that standard looks like. Top open standards for SDD are OpenSpec, an open standard that defines a structure for AI workflows, focusing on a living spec that evolves. SpecKit and Tessel, right? So there are three, and I'm sure Amazon Kiro has come up with one as well, right? Okay, so there are multiple standards. There is no one spec on which industry has aligned. By the way, I don't think industry has aligned on anything at all, right? Can we, you know, does ThoughtWorks Tech Radar mark spec driven development as, you know, to be endorsed, or are they testing it? I think let's find out. So ThoughtWorks spec driven ThoughtWorks Tech Radar, right? Okay. If you don't know what a ThoughtWorks Tech Radar is, they usually, for any tool, they basically assess how technology is evolving and being adopted, right? And I think every tech piece of tech, they segregate in four different areas: techniques, tools, platforms, and language frameworks. And I think in this case, it seems to be a technique. So let's see, is there a spec driven development here? Coding agents. Okay, is there a better way to do this? Ralph loop, that's interesting. We'll come back to it. It's a technique, or is it a tool, or is it a platform or a language, right? Can we search tech radar? Okay. Can we search a tech radar? Right. Popular search is spec driven development. Not on the current edition. Okay. It's on assess, right? So ThoughtWorks doesn't endorse it yet. I think even they are assessing it. And I think so should all of us. I think we should all assess by experimenting with this technology and seeing and actually trying to build a software, right? Which we will do in our maybe next episode. We will try to build a complete software with spec and see how that works out in practice. I think I have lots of good ideas, or well, I don't know if they are good or not, but I think lots of ideas about interesting tools that will help me personally in my own work. And okay, right, I won't name it. Okay, we'll discuss it tomorrow. Right, so I think we discussed this. What is a spec? We looked at that. Is there a good way of writing a perfect spec? We looked at multiple different uh, standards of writing a spec. Is this something endorsed by the industry? Now, look, I do trust ThoughtWorks to some extent, and if they are saying it's assess, that means they are not completely yet convinced that this is the direction that industry should take. So, is it something endorsed by the industry? No. Is everyone trying it out? Probably yes. Is this scaring me a bit? I think yes, but is it also exciting? It is, because if you can simply define your software in detail and just let it flow, wow, you can build things so rapidly. What is the community talking about it? Spec driven development. Whenever it's about community, to be honest, I have high trust for it. Has anyone tried spec driven development? Does anyone use spec driven development? Spec driven development and other shitty stuff. Oh, there is a subreddit for it. Spec driven development is the only way to scale. Let's just look at a few opinions about it. Okay, you assume you need, okay, I think I might cut it out. You assume you need do the spec correct up front. You need to write spec correct spec up front. That is incorrect. The spec is there to be refined and iterated on. The point is the thing you want the software to do is recorded in spec always. Architecture, frameworks, code samples. Okay. I just want a rough yes, I like it. Yes, I don't. I've played around with it. I haven't. I'm looking at some opinions as simple as that. Okay. What about this one? SGD. Prompts are not spec. Been using AI coding tools heavily lately, and one thing that clicked, prompts are not spec. They feel like it because you describe what you want, but they don't define edge cases, constraints, failure condition. That is true. I think no one has patience when you are vibe coding to write at as big a prompt, and that is something that the kind of UX you design invites that. For example, if you have used Lovable, Lovable has a short text box where you write a prompt. Now, when you write a prompt in a short spec, you won't go beyond a few paragraphs because of savability. Because what if you close your browser? What if whatever you have written is not saved? What do you want to just save and come back? For that, you need a very specific dedicated IDE if you want to write long pieces of text. For that, something like a Visual Studio Code, or maybe what we just saw, Amazon Kiro, might just work perfectly. What breaks about SDD past the first few features and how I ended up designing around it. Okay, so here is a realistic example of that. Why most SDD setups collapse and a different bet that avoids it. The code is the spec. Planning produces a graph, not a checklist. Okay, requirements carry IDs. Architecture components reference those IDs. The task graph has dependencies, coherence groups. Okay. Why a graph? At execution time, each task needs a briefing built from only the parts of the plan that apply to it. A task in the auth module. Okay, this is slightly going down to the detail. I think I haven't caught up yet, right? So I request you guys to read through all these different posts. This was 5 days back. The post itself is 5 days ago. So this is really new. I built my own SDD for my company. I do not commit spec and any changes in rock solid once the plan is finished. I can leave for hours at the end. It will be coded correctly. If you commit spec, you should either consider as museum or ensure they are updated. And I think this later is not possible at scale. I think what I understand is what Stibbons underscore is trying to say here is you build a spec and then you let agent do its work in the backend, right? You do not need to commit full spec, but any changes that happen to the spec, they are rock solid because now they are documented and now agents can like work through the changes in its own time. You don't need to be there. Make sense? Bralka did ask, nice, what kind of work have you done with your SDD? Mostly building itself, but like spec kit. Once you understand what needs to be in your agents.md, so maybe this is where the detail coming in is coming in. I would like to test it out. It looks really cool. You have probably seen discussions about it, but what about something that something like Karpathy's LLM wiki idea to reduce drift and trim a bit thus. Okay. So yeah, there are like tips and tricks coming up by people who have been tinkering with SDD, but there is no one perfect way of, hey, this is how you develop software with AI coding agents. And spec driven development is a completely endorsed thing that you should be doing. And if you are doing anything else, then you are completely living under a rock. It's not, yeah, I think it's evolving, and I'm sure we'll need to keep an eye on this because The promise itself is strong, right? This invites more people to develop software. Can I build front end, back end, everything? That's a good question, right? Front end can be a single repository thing. Backend can be multi-repository if we think about microservices as an architecture. So let's say if I'm building a large scale architecture where there are many different components which are connected to each other involved, then how do you define the whole system in a single spec? I'm sure like each of your subsystems will need its own dedicated spec driven development based system. I think your API contracts and your system contracts will be very important, right? Everything about your database design, your data modeling will simply just become even more important and will need a place somewhere in the system in the spec driven development because you can't just leave it to text. I think you'll need to be very specific about what you want to track, what are the fields, what are the columns. So somewhere I think data modeling will be really key in the whole thing. What is the fastest way of writing the spec? I don't know. I think we should play around with Amazon Kiro. And did we? This is interesting. Are you seeing what's running on my screen? Well, I'm pretty sure you are. So it seems in Kiro you can see the three things we discussed, right? Requirements, design, and tasks. In requirements, I hope there are requirements. In design, there will be like a higher level decisions on what the design decision has been taken for maybe the architecture, maybe how services have been modeled, and the tasks. So it seems like tasks are clickable, and it seems like there are checklists like items as well. Ah, this is really cool. So you can click on tasks if you want to choose which of them you want to be done first. You can just pick and choose. This is really interesting. It seems like they have thought about it, which is rare. Okay, watch demo.
Hi, this is Kiro, the new agentic IDE that works along the process so it gets requirements document as its first spec
So
feature
this is the
generated this
requirement document.
criteria. How it is handled. It includes
Acceptance criteria.
it has user stories and acceptance criteria. The spec feature generated this requirements document as its first step in helping.
You can see in the acceptance criteria, when a user visits sign-in page, then the systems shall display a sign in with Google button alongside existing sign in with incognito. Sorry, sign in with cognito button, right? So it seems there are these standards that one has to follow when you are defining the acceptance criteria, right? So there is some standard to it. You can't just go on describing your system as a user in user's language in any different way, right? So what I was thinking in my own mind that spec driven development may just make it really easy to develop software. You can basically open, I don't know, some kind of a voice note system, or maybe just like put on a microphone and just start talking about what system you want to build. It just like creates everything. I have a feeling even the requirements.md document can just be generated using prompts. So what will happen in practice is people will do this expansion using agents. People who are really systematic in terms of what they want may go on write every detailed requirement themselves. But for example, a login page is a requirement, right? Like a classic authentication flow. No one will describe it in detail. Like all those things will be fairly standard. I would even question if you need a detailed spec for it. Only if you want, maybe in the future, maybe if you want to have a login or a authentication flow done in very non-standard way, which I wouldn't recommend, then you might just detail it down. If not, agents should know what a standard authentication system and flow looks like. Right. Who should be writing the spec? This is interesting. And we kind of answered that because the requirements itself can be written by someone who can describe a product that they want. So it can be business, it can be engineers, it can be someone from the business. But the design, so the requirements part, the design part, and the tasks. The design will be possibly be created by agents, but it will be reviewed by tech leaders or engineering managers or maybe principal engineers or engineers themselves or some people who have a technical understanding of what a good design should look like. So they might review it, they might influence it, they might add to it or remove from it. Now, can you add to a design without it reflecting in some or the other way in requirements? So there should be a back propagation. Okay, what's happening here? My microphone went for a trip again, maybe went for a tea. Right. So who should be writing the spec? Who should be writing the spec? So we did look into it that spec can be written by, I think spec should be written by someone who has a clear idea of what requirements are, who is the closest to the user, or maybe a user themselves, or maybe, okay, that's, yeah, I yeah, I take it back. I think this should be written by someone who has a really good understanding of what the user wants, which usually could be product people, could be someone close to the users, maybe. Yeah, I think anywhere where users' voice is represented, the requirements are represented really well, and a solution is presented. I think that's where it becomes necessary. Is there a format to this, like Markdown? Yes, we did look at that. We did answer that, isn't it? My microphone is going on a trip time and again, and something I need to do something about. Right. Is there a format to this, like Markdown? Can we just start putting detailed spec in a Word doc? No, I think we did look at it. It has to be, it, it seems like if you write it in Markdown, that might be useful. Now, tomorrow, newer standards might come in. If anyone ever, okay, I think admission. If anyone ever declares that the perfect spec should be written in XML, I think please go to hell. I think anything that keeps writing as close to, I think anything that keeps writing as close to naturally in a writing medium, which is docs, maybe Notion, maybe Word doc, maybe notes, Notepad, it might be good. I hate Notepad, by the way. Okay, what are some competing interpretations of SDD? Let me just type that as it is. Can have SDD can refer to several distinct concepts depending on the context. Specification driven development. In the context of modern AI first coding, SDD, often interpreted as spec driven development. This approach focuses on writing requirements. Okay, that's the one we came up with. Well, software design document. Okay, we are not talking about that SDD. Okay, so let me be specific. Spec driven development. Spec driven development in the era of AI assisted engineering is no longer just about heavy upfront documentation. It is a spectrum ranging from strict formal planning to living, iterative human AI collaborative workflows. Right, okay. So there is a spec first, formalist, and living spec, which is agile. Right, so there will be representation of both what a flow is, waterfallish, and agile-ish methodologies in spec. Spec as a source, spec as a guide. Task-driven, development-centric versus agent-driven systems. Spec-driven versus context-driven systems. Okay, to be very honest, from where I started, I think I seem to have built a pretty good idea of what is spec driven development. And I hope you did too. If there are any more questions that I haven't covered at all, then please put them in the comments and I will try to come back to you. And maybe we can have a follow up of this kind of session where I will try to find more answers and answer those based on my understanding. Yeah, thanks all for listening, and I will be making more of such videos very soon, and if you are interested, please follow me.